When I was running a project, I felt more like an engineer building things. But when I stepped up into a department manager role, I felt like I was the art of project management. It's a discipline. It's a technical discipline. So we found it pretty easy to, the bigger the misalignment, the more you're operating in a stressful environment and you're not being true to yourself. Eventually, it's that tension.
What happens when the suit no longer fits? Not just physically, but philosophically. Today on Building Doors, we're speaking with Domenic De Fazio, a leader who stepped into the COO seat not by playing a part, but by staying true to who he is. From his early days as general manager to now leading at the top, Domenic shares what it really takes to lead with authenticity, how to navigate boardrooms when your values don't fully align, and why empathy, consistency, and culture are the cornerstones of his leadership legacy. This isn't just another story about climbing the ladder. It's about refusing to lose yourself on the way up. If you're a leader who wants to stay grounded while guiding others, this episode is for you. Welcome to Building Doors. Welcome to the Building Doors podcast. Dom De Fazio, Domenic, it's so great to have you on as a guest. And I know we've been talking about this a little while, but life is busy. So I'm really excited to get you on and talk about your career journey. Where I want to start with, and I think would be really interesting for the listeners, is to talk me through why you chose construction in the first place. So why you actually chose this sector.
As corny as you sound, construction chose me. So I graduated in the early 90s when jobs were a dime a dozen. And like most people at that point, I opened the yellow pages and applied to as many organisations as I could. And there just happened to be a really cool project within a few kilometres of where I was living. What we now call the EJ Wind Bridges over the Maribyrnong River for a company called Transport Construction, applied to them and got a gig with them. So my first job was on a construction site, and it didn't take long to sort of get seduced by it and fall in love with the smaller dirt, the smaller concrete, and the progress that you see on a day-to-day basis.
What kept you in the sector as well? So you started off there, and what kept you hooked?
I still remember, like even really early on, despite the challenge, like we all have challenges day to day at work, right? But despite the challenges we had, you could see progress, right? You could physically see what you were achieving. My brother is in IT and he's working for an insurance company, and he said, "You don't understand how jealous I am that you've got so much to show for the work you do." And if you've got a little bit of an ego, as you start to build a portfolio, you drive around you drive around the places you've worked. And for me, a lot of that has been Melbourne, and there's monuments to your ego all over the place, and it is nice being associated with it. And and for your family, as far as your family are concerned, or my family at least, I built the CityLink tunnels, I built the EJ Wind Bridges, I upgraded the Monash Freeway. They don't really appreciate that, there's thousands of people involved, but from their perspective, it was all me. And I guess it's nice to have those tangible sort of reinforcements as to the work you do.
Now I want you to talk me through, you've had a really interesting leadership journey too. You've worked across different sectors in leadership roles, or different parts of the sector, not necessarily just roads, but also other areas in the electrical side as well, then moving over to New Zealand. So a lot that you've covered. Tell me about your very first leadership role.
I guess the first time I really felt like my first leadership role was probably as a project manager on a project, right? But the first time I really felt it was when I finished working on projects and I got to run a department. And I felt like I was running a business as opposed to a project. When I was running a project, I felt more like an engineer building things. When I stepped up into a department manager role, I felt like I was running a business of sort. And all of a sudden, you're responsible for a whole lot more people. You're responsible for a portfolio as opposed to a single focus project, and there was no end. As a project had an end date, and whereas once I jumped into that role, you were more future thinking, and it was more long term, and it was more about the sustainability of the business. And I felt like leadership. I felt not the burdens, but maybe the responsibility of leadership's more in that role than I had when I was a project manager.
Were you prepared for that shift, or what was it like going from you're a project manager leading and building stuff to all of a sudden being a business manager? Was there like a training or transition, or was it a lot to figure out?
Look, I loved it, but no, there is no training. I'm very grateful that I got to do that early on in my career, because part of the training was the job itself. But when I felt like that job there was my training for when I jumped into the GM role, right? Because when I jumped into the GM role, I felt very comfortable in that seat, because I thought, I've been doing this for years and years. This is just on a bigger scale, but otherwise I'm managing a portfolio, I'm managing people, multiple clients, a pipeline of work, developing strategy, all very similar themes, just on a bigger scale. So, no, I didn't have training for that initial role, but it was my training for the bigger roles.
What were the steepest learning curves for you? So you didn't get training, and you learned through doing and actually, taking on the role. Reflecting back, what were the points of learning or the things that you needed to quickly adapt to in that role?
I think the first shock I got was I jumped into that role, and I jumped into that role in a brand new department. So we started from zero, and I had a very clear vision as to what it was going to look like, and how we were going to progress. And we got about 6 months in, and I was delighted with myself because it was going exactly according to my plan. And I started to hear noises that, the board were uncomfortable if it kept going the way it was, that shut down the department. And I was in a bit of horror, and I thought, hang on a sec, this is going exactly as per plan. And I think I learned two lessons. One is, if you have a plan, a vision, a strategy, well, then you need to take a whole lot of people along, right? Not just your team, but board members and senior managers. And I also learned that, without offending anyone, those guys don't always get it either. Their expectation was that we started this business day one, and day one we were turning a profit. Whereas I had this wonderful little graph where I said, okay, the first 6 months is about investing. We're going to employ people. We're going to bid work. We're going to win that work, and we're not really going to start to see the rewards 6 months plus. So my graph showed a loss for the first 6 months, and then we started to come out. And I was delighted that we were, following that plan. But all the board members saw was a negative result for the first 3 or 4 months, and that started to scare them. So I guess what I learned there was, whatever your plan is, you need to be able to bring people along, or at least share that with people.
And so you would have got the opportunity to move into that role. So a lot of questions I hear all the time from project managers, project directors looking to make that step, whether they go into an operations manager role, GM, department manager, depending on what area of the sector that they work in. How did you prep yourself working on projects to get that opportunity? What were some of the actions you took to ensure that you were progressing your career?
Yeah, look, I think the driver to go into that space was not really ambition, but what it was that I was working in an environment where we were essentially a major projects business, but we really didn't have any training for our PMs to manage major projects. The first opportunity they got to manage a major project was as a PM on a major project, and so we thought we'd create this environment where we could develop young engineers into leaders and project managers, on smaller projects, so that they could then step up into a bigger role. And so, what we found was the art of project management. It's a discipline. It's a technical discipline. So we found it pretty easy to convert or to develop young engineers into project managers.
Mm-hmm.
All about the discipline of planning and resourcing and cost control, forecasting, commercial acumen. Then once they'd mastered that, it was about getting them to manage one or two people, then slowly getting them to manage a bigger team. And as we developed those skills, we then had someone who was very capable in managing clients, managing contracts, managing teams, albeit on a small scale. So then as they progressed onto the larger jobs, they were already in a seat that they were comfortable with, right? They just had to scale it up. So that was the driver. And again, I fell in love with that space, albeit I never had the ambition to go into that space. At that stage in my career, the thinking was you go and deliver a large project, and then the next role is a larger project and a larger project, and you just, and I'd seen some of the big names deliver, like Rob Cranston on CityLink and the like, and they're the they were the big roles that you thought that you'd aspire to. So maybe by accident, I fell into business management and fell in love with it.
So one of the things I want to ask you about in terms of that managing up or being able to, communicate your vision and trajectory across not just your team that you're leading and driving a vision, but also to the board and other stakeholders. Looking back now, what advice would you give to your younger self?
I don't like it, right? But the advice I'd give myself is that that's okay, right? In a way, I find the term managing up, to me, it sounds manipulative, right? And that doesn't sit comfortable with me. So the advice I'd give myself is to not try and manage up for outcomes, but more to bring people along on the journey. Mm-hmm. And because it doesn't sit with me, that concept of managing up. It sounds condescending.
Yeah. Well, it's more how do you communicate the vision that or the trajectory that you're going on, you see for the business at the board level? How do you communicate and collaborate with them so that they feel a part of that journey as well?
Absolutely, yes.
Is it hard sometimes, or a question I have is, what about when the board may have a vision that doesn't align with yours? So this how do you handle and navigate that?
Yeah. My initial response to the question is that can only happen so many times, right? Because the bigger the misalignment, the more you're operating in a stressful environment, and you're not being true to yourself, and eventually that tension will compromise you or the organisation. So it's not, that's only sustainable for a short period of time, or with particular situations, right? And I think we do, or I do, what a lot of people try and do, and that is, you try and articulate, your vision or your views. You try and get some support, with other stakeholders. You bring a bit of conviction to the table. But I've also learned that there are sometimes people that may have more power or authority than you, that have also got the authority to make decisions that don't align with you. And every now and again, you suck it up, but you push like hell when you can.
What do you do when a board is misaligned? Have you come across that, where you've got a board and there's really very clear, differences in the board level? How do you navigate that?
So you phrase that question as if that's an unusual occurrence, right? My
I didn't
experience of
mean to.
most boards, I'm going to offend everyone here, are a little bit dysfunctional.
Love it. Like a dysfunctional family, Dom.
Like a dysfunctional family. And if, you know, that concept of family is an interesting one, isn't it? Because, we all, I've worked for many organizations that consider themselves a family business, from large organizations to small. And with that comes the connotation of the Brady Bunch. But the reality is they're more like a true family, and that comes with all the dysfunction as well. How do you cope with a board that's misaligned? If you're going to be a little bit manipulative and strategic about it, you really need to start socializing ideas with individuals one-on-one, and so that you're not sort of ambushed and trying to have a public forum, i.e., a board meeting of debate. So and you try and find some compromises. What's driving people, and and ultimately, challenge everyone in terms of what we're trying to achieve collectively for the organisation. Even board members, even though they forget it, have got an obligation to the organisation, not themselves, not even shareholders or their own self-interest, but to the long-term sustainability of the organisation.
So it's interesting what you described there is there's a certain level of politics that as you go through the different levels, you have to learn to navigate in your own way and learn to build relationships, socialize ideas in the right forum before bringing them to the table. How do you think that your leadership style had to adapt when you went from being, a GM to a CEO? What were some of the biggest transitions you uncovered there?
Well, you've just nailed it there. As a GM, especially where I've worked, you were at that level where you had a CEO to protect you from the board. Right? So protect you from the politics, protect you from a little bit of the uncomfortable things. And it was almost the perfect level in the organization where you could live with a level of naivety. And I probably, there's one particular CEO that I appreciated a lot more when I stepped into a CEO role, because I appreciated how much he was protecting us from all the politics and some of the more the uncomfortable stuff, because boards can be quite demanding and they want quick results. So the biggest transition was one, sort of confronting that reality, and then two, navigating it.
What were the skills that you learnt that you had to possess, and then in turn you think that people going into those roles need to have that level of resilience, dealing with the board and dealing with the challenges? What skill set did you have to build, and did you already have?
Yeah, look, you need to use your voice. You need to keep them close. I've always enjoyed working with and given the benefit of a large amount of autonomy, and I love that. I just get on with what I want to do. But I find that with boards, you can't just forget about them and get on with what you've got to do. You've got to keep them close, at least communicate, socialize ideas, and again, without at the fear of sounding manipulative, sometimes you start planting the seed of an idea months in advance and get the conversation started, the socializing of the idea, get people used to the idea, and ironically, sometimes it turns around and somebody says, "I've got a great idea," right? And it just happens to be the thing that you seeded months ago. And if you're prepared to put your ego aside and just accept that, we've achieved what we're trying to achieve, then I'm sounding manipulative, aren't I?
No, I don't think so.
Achieve what you're trying to do. But like I said, I think sometimes even boards need time to get used to ideas, especially when we're stepping outside of either our comfort zone or if you got the conviction to stay the course when you're not getting immediate results, then you need to have the courage of those convictions and bring people along.
Touching on what you said before, I don't think it's manipulative at all, and I'm really glad we're talking about it because I met with a regional construction manager a week or so ago, and one of the things, and it's a common question that people start to ask themselves between that regional construction manager GM sort of level, where do I want to go, and what does the future landscape look like for me? Ongoing. Do I want to stop at GM level? Can I see myself at C-suite? And what are the certain things I need to think about? And that ability to communicate and manage the different stakeholders in what can be a challenging level with different board personalities, agendas, ideas is something that you do have to kind of, and I don't know, I see what you say about it sounds manipulative, but it's really kind of in those corporate roles seems to be a lot of it is around different personalities and navigating that that side of things as well. I don't know. I don't think that's manipulation. I don't know what the word is for it, but there's something in that. That's obviously a skill that you have to hone in on GM, CEO level when you start to have to communicate a vision across multiple people that need to be on the same page that may be more senior than you in the organisation.
Look, absolutely. It's it is one of the challenges, in that transition from, say, GM role to a role that's board facing. And look, for the most of it, I think you reach alignment. That where it gets most challenging is when you have board members that are misaligned. So not necessarily with you, but with each other. And there's agendas there. And, quite often, I say that there's only ever 2 votes in a board, right? Because, I find that board members seem to align with one side or the other. So you're not negotiating or socializing the idea with 10 to 12 different people. It's typically with 2 groups, the for and against, or not even the for and against. It is for and against, but for and against each other, not your idea.
Yeah, that's something, I'm glad you're sharing it because this is something that people may not out on projects. If you're a project director out on the job, I mean, you see a level of politics certainly, but nothing to that extent with having to manage different people, personalities and their own agendas against each other, other than obviously having that client exposure too as a project director. Yeah. The question I also have is around your career trajectory because you have progressed, and if I look at some of your roles, you've progressed in the one organisation and been able to go through and succession plan up through the different levels, cross countries as well. How did you highlight, and again, not manipulative, it's more, how did you highlight your capability? Because we all know that succession planning, high potentials, this is no secret that a lot of the large organisations go through that process. One of the things people ask is, how do I stand out? How do I start to let people see that I'm capable of that next role? What did you do there to stand out in that space?
Yeah, look, there's a whole range of things, but I remember at one stage there was a GM role that was advertised that I had no interest in. And I said to my boss, do I need to apply for that role to show you my ambition? Or can I just sit here and tell you that I'm ambitious and I want to progress through the organisation? I just don't want that role. And his advice was put yourself through the process. All right. One, you'll learn something about yourself and the process itself, and it's a public display of your ambition. So So the first thing I say is you've got to be seen, right? And being very mindful of not going into that whole that Pandora's box of working from home. If you're young and ambitious and you are not seen, well, you are not seen, right? And I think one of the things that scared me was I remember doing with the board and managing director a succession planning workshop, and the MD was throwing names of, oh, what about this young engineer, Fred? You know, I've seen him on site. He's done really good things. I like the way he presents himself. So he was the MD having opinions on who was the next suitor in the organisation based on some small interactions with them. And it was so powerful in that if you're not seen, again, you're not seen, so volunteer for those special projects, if you have the opportunity to stand up and speak, take it. If there's an opportunity to go and lead a project, put your hand up. And that's my biggest advice. Be seen and take risks. I haven't traveled a lot for my career, but, relocated to Brisbane on one occasion, relocated to New Zealand on another, both of which I thought were risks, and both paid off. So you've got to be, I think you've got to be prepared to back yourself a little bit and take some risks.
Fortune favours the brave, right? So if you're willing to be courageous.
Absolutely. Yeah. And sometimes you take that leap not knowing how it's going to pan out.
Mm. Are there any, looking back on your career as well, I think as much as there's those positive reflections and lessons, are there things you would have done differently?
I think we all do this as we get a little bit older. Trust your gut, all right? And trust people more, all right? And trust younger people more. Sometimes you have this bias that unless you've got a certain level of experience, then I'm not going to put you in that role. But I find that people pay back trust in big dividends. So, trust people, always be prepared to be vulnerable. If you genuinely want to develop yourself, then you need feedback. And if people don't trust you or you don't have a safe environment, then you're not going to get that feedback. And hence you're missing out on that development opportunity. So I think, as I reflect, do more of the things that sound obvious, the trust, the vulnerability, the safe working environment, the backing your people.
What was, so I'm glad this perfect lead into my next question, because one of the things I'm curious about is what was some feedback you received that was hard to swallow or hard to take, and that you were able to, build it into something positive?
I'll give you two answers to that. The one early feedback I got early in my career was like, the shit sandwich. It was, Dominic, you're great at all these things here, and you've got all this potential. You just need more mongrel in you. Right?
Yeah.
And so, we're probably going back 20 years ago, and I made a decision back then, and my response was, if getting to the top means I've got to be more of a mongrel, I'm prepared not to get to the top.
Yeah.
So, but I still took on the feedback that people wanted to see, maybe not mongrel, but a version of it, more decisive or quicker to act. So I think the way that I took that on is that just being honest to yourself, that sometimes there are things that you don't enjoy doing or like doing, and just admitting to yourself, this is ugly. I don't like this. And then they give, and then with that permission to accept that, you go on, and you do what you got to do. I saw this. I was listening to a podcast on depression and anxiety one day, and something sort of triggered when I was listening to it, where they said, sometimes I wake up and I know it's going to be a bad day, but that's okay. I just accept it's going to be a bad day. I don't beat myself up. I just accept it is what it is, and I move on. And that's how I sort of tackle those harder decisions, the ones that you find it harder to be decisive on, or the ones that you might procrastinate a little bit. You admit to yourself that this is not something I'm going to enjoy, and then move forward.
It's a great example. With one of the things we've spoken about in the past, and I know is really important to you, is authentic leadership and leading in line with your values. Tell me about how that's shaped you as a leader over the years, and the decisions you have made.
We all talk about values, right? And there's only you look at anybody's values, and they're all credible, and sometimes it takes a little bit of effort to work out what your own values are. The advice I got was, have a think about the things that piss you off, right? And quite often it's because they cross your values, right? And that's how I come to authenticity. It grates me when I see people aren't, genuine or authentic. That there's not that authenticity about them. So that's how I've sort of established that it's one of my values. I just find it easier to trust people because there's no agenda, right? I feel safe when I feel people are authentic, and I guess because that's a value to me, I want people to feel safe around me, and safe that I'll be honest with them and give them give them care, give them opportunity, but also give them honest feedback. And you quite often hear the term, you've got to give people brutal feedback, and I hate that term. I think if you're going to be authentic, you give people empathetic and honest feedback, right? Not necessarily brutal. There's nothing authentic about brutality.
I really want to touch on more around what you spoke around there, and it's essentially those values in action, right? So authenticity to you is being authentic and giving empathetic feedback. What else do you believe when you're looking at yourself as a leader that are the things that you do that align with authentic leadership?
One of the my very first experiences with when I first started working was I worked for a project manager where I had to pick the right moments to deliver difficult news, and as a young engineer, I found that very stressful to have to navigate someone else's emotions, I still remember thinking to myself back then, if I'm ever in a position of leadership, I don't want to be that person where people are second guessing my behaviors, how I'm going to react, whether the way I'm coming across is the authentic me or another version of me. So I guess that very first lesson sort of drives me to be someone that people, when they see the way that I behave, trust that, one, it's authentic, two, it's consistent, and three, that it's safe. So people can, they don't have to pick the moment. If on the unlikely event that North Melbourne lost over the weekend, I don't want people to avoid me on the Monday, for example.
One of the things that you touched on there, which I want to talk about as well, is you kind of shared a story that I feel like the leadership you experienced, and both positive and negative leadership examples help shape us into the leader we're going to become. But it seems to me there's a very conscious choice for you to become the kind of leader that you wish you had, or that you may have had over the years.
Yeah, I think the way that I would answer that is, quite often I see people who hero worship someone or want to be just like someone, and I don't know that I align with that. In the end, right, you can only be you, right? But you might find traits in other people that you either like and you want to model those traits or behaviors, or conversely that you dislike and you want to be the opposite of that. So along the way, I've tried to pick up some of those things along the way, and some of those things, like that example I gave you, go back, nearly 30 years ago, but they resonate with me. Like I remember, I needed to have as a very young engineer, I needed to have a very, very difficult conversation with the general manager. And the general manager that at the time, I'd walk into his office, and it was a long office, so there was probably another 5 or 6 meters to his desk, and he'd be sitting in his big armchair, laying back, and quite intimidating. And there was nothing in my mind about not modeling that behavior, but I know that I didn't feel comfortable. Anyway, he moved on, but I needed to continue that conversation with the general manager. The next gentleman that took the seat knocked on his door. As soon as he saw me at the door, he stood up and he walked towards me, put his hand on my back, and steered me towards the meeting room table, and sat next to me side by side, and started telling me a story about his brother. Right? And I thought, he doesn't know who I am, and I don't really know who he is, but I instantly felt comfortable. And after about 10 minutes, he then said, "How can I help you?" Right? And I just remember how I felt, and how I thought, if I've ever got that power, that's how I want to make people feel. And again, just another example of how, that was a positive example of how you pick things up. I've never said to myself, I want to be just like him, right? But I love that way he made people feel comfortable, and I wanted to be able to do that.
The other question I wanted to ask you, because it's clear to me that the way you lead is so important, but now you have the task of driving a culture through your leadership within a whole organization. So the sphere of who you've got to influence is far greater as well, and how you hire, how you do all of that piece of work to make sure you drive the right culture at a broader level. How do you do that? Like, what are some of the things you implement now to make sure that that's something felt within the whole business?
Yeah, I think, most organizations are very good at developing their values. And I think there's a lot of authenticity when they develop those values and sort of promote and communicate that that's what we're all about. But then putting it in action, or actually holding each other accountable to that, is where the trick is, right? The first one is, when we ourselves are behaving differently or in a way that contradicts those values. So if you haven't got the courage to hold each other accountable, then that falls apart. Or, the classic, somebody's, great operationally, but their behaviors compromise your values. It can very easily make the mistake of accepting that because of the operational or even the commercial benefits, and being true to that, being prepared to address people's behavior despite their technical skills, is, I think, how you stay true to that.
where have you had to make a tough call where where it was commercially a difficult decision, but someone, obviously without sharing too much personal information, but have you had to make a tough call in the past in that space?
Without trying to give away too much, I made a call like that once, and the feedback I got from the person was, I thought I was a protected species. I thought I'd play up a little bit. You'd give me a tickle up, then I'd play up, then I'd behave, then I'd play up a bit more. You give me a tickle up, and we just sort of, do the dance a little bit. I didn't actually think that it would come to this, right? And and my response was, it may seem like I'm the person that's letting you go, but in the reality, you made the call, right? And your peers have made the call, right? Because I think sometimes people feel safe if they're bringing home the numbers, they can get away with a little bit more. And the reason they feel safe doing that is because quite often they are.
Mm. Do you think that person? Have you ever heard from that person? Do you think that person learned from that experience?
I don't know if they learned from it. I know that they had many jobs after that, as opposed to the one that where I was involved, which was a long term. So probably struggled to settle in because didn't have the runs on the board for people to excuse the behaviour.
Yeah, that's interesting. That's a really good example because I know a lot of people would have encountered that in their career, and making the tough calls not always easy. With all the work that you've been doing in your career and the roles that you've had, what's the legacy that you want to leave in the sector, or what's your legacy?
Almost feels like a gravestone moment. What do I want on my tomb?
What do we want on Dom's tombstone?
He was a great bloke. I would like people just to say that because they worked with me, they had the opportunity to be better, or at least their true self.
It's a great one. We're going to move into the rocket round now too, Dom, which is a bit of fun, and just a few questions.
Would you rather?
Yeah, would you rather? Well, first question, coffee or wine?
Coffee.
Yeah, I actually knew you'd say that. I don't know why I asked it, but it's for the listeners, really. Cats or dogs?
Dogs.
Yeah. And favourite holiday destination?
Because I've been to Florence 4 times, I've got to say Florence.
You have to say Florence, absolutely. And what podcasts do you listen to as well?
I tend to listen more to Audible books than podcasts.
What's an Audible book? Share us some of your favourites.
Or this might give you too much insight. I do like to listen to a lot of books around human behaviour, and a few on leadership as well. But and then I mix it up with books on health and well-being, longevity, and the like. So some of my favourites are Behave, which is all about why we as human beings do what we do and say what we say. It can be, those sort of books can get a bit deep sometimes in that there's a lot of chemistry and science involved in them. But just to understand the mechanisms of what goes on, me pretending to be a part-time psychologist, and I think the more you understand people, the better chance you have of succeeding in this space as well. So I love those sort of books. Love books on leadership and development. I think anyone in this space has read all the classics, but a lot of us like Simon Sinek. We've all read Good to Great. We've all read Seven Habits. All those classics, and they're not all perfect, but if you can take one or two insights out of them, I think you can use that. But yes, I'm a big Audible fan.
What was one of the books you've read that left a profound impact for you, and what was that impact?
I read a trilogy by a historian. He's a Jewish historian called Noah Harari, and the first book was it was called Sapien, and in the opening statement or the opening paragraph, he says, if it's not physics, chemistry, or biology, it's a belief, right? And it sort of it challenged my thinking in that so much of what we proclaim as fact is just belief, right? And if you're in a community that believe the same thing you believe, then it almost becomes truth. So, for example, this concept of fairness, right? Fairness only works if we all agree on the concept of fairness, right? And it sort of it got me thinking about how much culture has an impact on what's okay and what's not okay. Like if you're in the United States and you walk down the street slagging off the president, you might get told to move on. Maybe you're fine, right? You do the same thing in China, and you might end up in prison. You do exactly the same thing in Russia, and you might accidentally fall off a balcony. Exactly the same thing, exactly the same biology, physics, and chemistry, and all that's changed is culture and belief. So I love that concept that most of what we use to navigate our lives is belief rather than physics, chemistry, or biology.
That is a great example. Thank you. Thank you for sharing that. It's absolutely true, and so much, and aligns with so much of what we've talked about today too. And the last and final one, I always like to ask, what makes you feel like you're home?
What makes me feel like I'm home? I do like calm, right? So when every now and again, the stars align and everything's in its place. The people around you are in a good space, and that puts me in a good space. Whether it's family, whether it's at work, whatever environment I'm in, if the people around me are feeling it, that makes me feel at home.
Thank you. That's a great example. And thank you so much for coming in as a guest. I think you've been really, authentic and open about your journey. And I really hope, and it's always my hope, that someone listening to the episode, and you'd be surprised, they'll probably message you, will get and take a lot out of this for their own learnings in their own career. How can people connect with you, learn more about you, Dom, as well? What's the best platform and way for them to do that?
Like most of us, I've got a LinkedIn account. I'm very happy for people to reach out via LinkedIn and have a conversation. But I'm just assuming, Lauren, that nobody's going to listen, so that shouldn't be an issue at all.
Well, Dom, you'll be surprised. I think most of our guests actually get some messages from people. Like people personally message them the takeaways, and I actually think that's from feedback I've had from previous guests, that's their favorite thing to receive, is somebody's taken something out of the episode.
Are you giving Rogan a run for his money, are you? In terms of podcasts and audiences.
See it, be it, right? You've got to start somewhere, right? So thank you. Look, and thank you so much for coming on as a guest. I really enjoyed the chat. I learn just as much from every episode as well. So as always, if you're enjoying the episode, like, share, subscribe, rate, review. Please share it with your friends. You never know who needs to hear the insights or inspiration that could change the trajectory of their day. So thanks for coming on the podcast.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks, man.
If this episode gave you new insights, don't let them go to waste. Take action. Apply them. And if you want more insider strategies from the best in construction and infrastructure, make sure to subscribe. Share this with someone who needs to hear it. And remember, the leaders who open the most doors aren't waiting for opportunities, they're building them.